All right, hello and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year's packed a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The 2024 conference brings you this session, Marginalized Genders in Fiction. If you want more content similar to this topic, you can also check out Depiction Matters, Female Characters in Sci-Fi Fantasy from the 2022 WriteHive conference, as well as Gender as a Construct, writing trans, non-binary, and GNC representation from the 2021 conference, as well as all of the other great panels from this year's conference. I'm XM Moon. I will be kind of a co-moderator and panelist for this session, but I'm going to go ahead and let our other panelists introduce themselves, starting with Finn.
Thank you so much. I'm Finnian Burnett. I have a doctoral degree in English pedagogy, which is in using story to create equity in multicultural classrooms. And I think it's really relevant to this panel because I find that marginalized genders are definitely one of the points in which we don't see equity in a lot of representation still. I'm also a writer and a presenter, and I just got back, in fact, from a young adults conference where we were talking to the kids, and I'll say the kids are all right, man. All the subject matter of their stories had such a wide range of diversity. So I'm really excited for this panel.
Awesome. JR, sorry, I know I had said reverse alphabetical order, and it's fine. I don't know the alphabet.
I don't either. I wasn't sure. I thought Finnian was first as well. So I am JR. I am a romance novelist and developmental editor. And I also work in equity and inclusion in nonprofit organizations, including soccer equity and also in local mental health organizations. So it'll be great talking to you guys.
All right, Carly, that makes it you.
I'm Kuhtz. I'm a fantasy author, and I also work in academic publishing in publishing house that is concentrates on anthropology, history, and also gender studies. I wrote a PhD on queer identities, but that was quite a long time ago. And I've just started to publish my queer fantasy series with a non-binary protagonist. Looking forward to the panel.
Hi, I'm Polk. I'm a fantasy novelist. I wrote The Kingsley Cycle, The Midnight Bargain, and Even Though I Knew the End. Alas, all I really do is write books and teach workshops every once in a while. I live in Alberta. It's kind of scary over here, but I'm hoping that we can pull through.
Fingers crossed. And yeah, I'm XM Moon. I'm an author and editor. And I also have a degree in gender studies, so I sometimes have thoughts about these things. And like everyone else said, very excited to be here. And with that, we will go ahead and dive directly into our first question. What do we mean by marginalized genders? I will let whoever wants to go first. Otherwise, I'll call on Finn again.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think of marginalized genders personally for anything that isn't like cis straight man, essentially, because women and non-binary folks, trans folks, I think all of those can fall under the umbrella of marginalized gender. So yeah, that would be my answer on that.
Carly, you want to go next?
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think about marginalized genders, and I'm thinking about, like, basically, if you are out in the world, existing and minding your own business, is somebody like, are you always looking over your shoulder for somebody who is going to have a problem with that in a very specific gender focused way? Not that I want to define marginalized genders by oppression, but I find it is a very useful definition for today.
I think that can be so true also, because I think so often the world can look at oppression in terms of like levels, especially when it comes to gender. Like how, well, a trans person is going through this much of the experience with gender, and a non-binary person may be going through this much of an experience with gender. And so they may be facing different levels of oppression. But the reality is, if you are going through the world and you're looking over your shoulder, if you're going through the world and there's legislation being made that um, impacts your gender or your body or your healthcare or the access that you're able to have in the world, you are a marginalized gender, regardless of what your gender is, whether you're agender, whether you're transgender, whether you're non-binary, whether you're a woman. You're facing a lot of those same struggles, regardless. And so ultimately, it does boil down to, if you are not a cis man, you are a marginalized gender because you're facing those same issues. You're facing the legislation. You're facing the problems that come when you're out and about in the world and you're going, okay, do I need to bring a buddy with me? Do I need to share my location with friends? Like, what could happen to me when I'm out in the world in this experience? And the way you experience the world is very similar, no matter how different your gender may be from someone else in that same experience.
And I'm not disagreeing because I do fully. But also I think to me, and I guess kind of my conception of it, if you're doing your gender wrong, even if you're falling within one of the accepted gender options, even if you are cis, if you are performing gender wrong, if you are not getting an A+ on that gender performance, you are going to experience consequences for that. You can be a cishet white man and doing gender wrong, and you will still receive some of the same impacts. Carly, you have anything to
Yes.
add?
I would definitely always be for a more like open definition anyway. And I definitely agree that like it just needs to be a tiny bit of diversion from the current picture of what you're supposed to look like, supposed to eat, supposed to, I don't know, dress like, and you get marginalized.
So kind of expanding beyond that, and looking at it in the context of fiction, what has been kind of the history and background of trans and non-binary representation? And we'll talk about now and recent years as a separate question, because I know they're going to go together and we're going to end up on that page. But looking at it, a little further back, more than I'd say 10, 15, 20 years even, where were we?
At the stage of a very rare kind of surprise, sometimes even a pleasant surprise. I'm having trouble thinking of an older book with say, specifically a trans or non-binary gendered character in the position of protagonist. They're usually secondary characters. And while I don't think that's necessarily bad, especially if you're an author who wants to write about a wide spectrum of genders, and you are not that one, you probably can't go wrong by like studying your butt off and getting yourself a really solid set of secondary characters with more widely defined genders. Lately, so much better. More room to improve, but so much better.
Yeah, I thought about that quite a bit, and the only main character that I came up with was Virginia Woolf's Orlando as like one of the big exceptions, and otherwise, like especially in the classic modern period, like lots of books or lots of authors just also muddled up identity, like gender identity and desire a lot. So yeah, definitely totally agree that it's so rare to find a non-binary / trans person in like the main role overall. And yeah.
I wanted to jump on Orlando as one of my, I mean, I think that's from the 1920s. So that was a fantastic book. I think a lot of what we experience as far as marginalized genders in early lit was more of allegorical things. So you'll find things, especially in fantasy, and so kudos to our fantasy authors here, because I'm a big fan of how fantasy and science fiction has been on the forefront of changing the way people view gender and everything else. And I know he's super problematic in a lot of ways, but Robert Heinlein did have a lot of character or a lot of experiences in his book where people can just change gender, where like society has developed to the point where if somebody says, I just want to change my gender, it's an easy process and it's fully accepted, and it was not looked upon as something bad. So despite, you know, a lot of the problematic stuff about his works, that was something that I remember reading as a teenager and being wowed by the concept.
Yeah, like one like probably my favorite book, if I had to choose one, is like a slim little book that was written in the 70s by an author, Tanith Lee. And she wrote a world in which the characters could get a body change. Basically, you could decide, you know, you wanted cinnamon skin and lemon hair, but you could also decide like what your gender is. You could be like maybe a little bit animally, you could get wings, you know, whatever. It's just fashion. And the whole idea of bodies as fashion, I loved this so much. One thing that I did notice when I was reading it was that, you know, everybody's changing their bodies around. So all of the romances and sexual relationships were binary heterosexual. And I was like, okay, maybe we can't have everything in a book in the 70s, but I was always really like, and people talking about how like they were mostly male or mostly female, or, you know, I can't really put my finger on it sometimes. I always thought that was super refreshing. Another weirdo of science fiction is John Varley. He did a bunch of stories in which, yeah, you could get another thing. You could get a body change. You could just decide, well, I want to have a woman's body this time. And what was interesting was is that he didn't make it, I want to be a woman this time. It was, I want to have a woman's body this time. And I always thought that was a really interesting distinction. But again, another weirdo, just gonna let you know.
Yeah, on the science fiction front, Ursula K. Le Guin comes to mind in The Left Hand of Darkness, where, but looking back on it, it's been a long time since I read it, but it almost has like there's a civilization where people usually don't have a gender, and then they come into get into a mating state, and then they adapt. But it always had something inhuman about it. Yeah, I don't think whether that's a good representation or not, but it's definitely, at least it's there, and it's a main character.
When I think about gender in fiction, I think you can also kind of scale out toward like beyond books. You notice like in TV and everything, as you look back 10, 15, 20 years, you know, what we were seeing in terms of marginalized genders, we would see like trans characters played off as a joke in shows like Friends. That was something that was, they were the butt of the joke, and they were relegated to side characters, off-screen characters who were meant to be laughed at. And now we're seeing trans characters show up on screen as main characters, and their transness is not the main part of their story. They are just a character who happens to also be trans. And so when you see like these trans characters played by trans actors, and that's not the central part of their story, it's just they are this character. Oh, and also they're trans. We've come so far, and it hasn't been that long. And I feel like we've got so much farther that we can go but seeing how far we've come in a short amount of time, I think is showing how much progress we are making. And the thing is like, I know that 5 years ago, it would have been hard to pick up any kind of book that had a trans character or a non-binary character in a bookstore. And now I'm not just having to pick up indie books to find that. I can find like widely published books that have that. And so it's like we're getting there, even if we're not all the way there yet.
So I'm glad you mentioned Friends because sorry, I'm a Friends hater. I'll say that right now on the record. But so you mentioned Friends, and Carly mentioned depictions of trans characters as not being human, which by the way, we also have a panel on that. It's monsters and robots in queer fiction. That was a lot of fun. We talked about this a lot actually, but I'm glad y'all brought that up because there are a lot of really bad depictions. So let's talk about that some. How have people done it wrong? And I want to kind of tie this into our next one, which is how can you include the rep in a more mindful way? Because C.L. Polk mentioned it as well, doing your research. So how have people done this wrong, both maybe on accident, meaning well, and as an active, continued way of marginalizing other genders? And how can we maybe avoid this?
First of all, when you were talking about bad representation, the first thing that came to mind was that movie, The Crying Game, where the character reveals being trans at the end, and that's like the big shock that they were keeping a secret. And that's such a harmful thing. And so I do think that there's been a lot that's been gotten wrong. And I guess to tie it into the mindfulness, I was thinking I'm writing a series with a straight cisgender man, my BFF and writing partner, Andrew Buckley. And we have non-binary and trans characters. And one thing we make sure to be mindful of is the characters never get misgendered, even when villains are attacking the characters. So we have these villains that are really horrible people that are doing things like murdering people and things like that, but they still refer to the trans characters by their correct names, by their correct pronouns, because that's such, to me, a level of acceptance. I'm a murderer and I'm probably going to kill you, but I'm not going to misgender you. And I think that's important to do that.
I agree that it's so important to have that level of respect there. I have seen some books that have used misgendering and dead naming someone in a way that is very kind of like reclaiming, and that they're telling something that you can tell is own voices, you can tell is part of their own lived experience, and they're using that to like in a way that can be healing. And as someone who does like still currently experience that from friends and families, I think that can be done well. I think there are ways to do it, but I think it takes a very strong degree of like respect and care to do it right. And I think it has to come from within that community, or it's not going to come off the correct way. I think there are a lot of writers who are working very, very hard to include more marginalized genders in their work, especially cis authors who are trying to be more mindful of like including non-binary characters and trans characters, or men who are trying to incorporate more women in their fiction in a more mindful way than they have in the past. And I think if you are going to do something like that, you almost have to write it from within your own lived experience, or it's not going to come off the same way.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really difficult balance between sprinkling in a few token characters here and there, and really like writing from an experience that makes them into an important character. I sometimes bristle a bit when it's just someone is popping up and they're not important. You don't really they're there for flavor. And that I always, I don't like people treating characters like this just for the bonus points.
right? Diversity declaration.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've seen like, you know, like it's like a nutrition label almost listing, well, we've got 5 trans characters and 3 black. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
what
That's
kind of stories are you telling?
67% of your recommended daily allowance of diversity.
Great, but how? Like, is it me shoving the handful of kale in my mouth, like by force, because I have to eat the green thing, or is it actually in there?
But to be fair, I'd rather have a book that does have some non-binary or trans characters than none. But yeah, I agree that like give me a little bit more than the token. But on the other hand, I don't really want like like I think the trans journey should be written by trans people, whereas a trans character existing and living could be written by anybody. So there is definitely a balance.
So I guess we've talked about kind of the more mindful way, and obviously, doing your research, sensitivity readers, all those fun things. What are some good examples? What are some that have done it right, both as, as background characters, because like y'all mentioned, that's an important thing to include, and as those main characters? I mean, everyone can just point to the covers behind them. That's fine. We can self promo now too. But
My
Sorry.
cover book is like basically everybody in that book is cis. So I can't point to my book. So you got to do everybody else's book.
well, I was gonna say, it's book 3 of the Kingston cycle, right?
Oh yeah, book 3 of the
That's
Kingston cycle. Basically, yeah, the most important character to the protagonist is a non-binary gendered person. And what I have is that their cultural group within the city is remarkably kind of relaxed about this sort of thing. Like if you decide that you're not a woman or a man, you're like in between, or you go back and forth between, or you just don't want to be gender at all, or you want to be both, everybody's okay with that. They have a pronoun in the language for them and everything. And like the people in the other culture are just kind of like, oh, well, that's neat. I don't think I understand, but that's neat. I just kind of decided that I wanted to do it that way because I'm a fantasy writer. I can just say, it's like if somebody is non-binary in this culture, everybody gets it. And so like there wasn't really any huge concern beyond like how they felt with their own personal, and I'm going to say very harrowing experience that they're out of and now trying to heal from, and like what banging outfit they decided to put together that day, because like the question of their social acceptance just wasn't there because they were already accepted. They were born accepted, as were generations before them. And at the time, I really felt like I needed to world build in that way for that particular book. And yeah, it was like writing that kind of was sort of like my dizziest daydream of binary gender acceptance. But yeah, for the most part, I write a lot of cis people.
You brought me to a thought that I kind of had, that we're going to backtrack a little bit, talking about the more mindful way. So when we're writing marginalized genders, right? Because again, there's a wrong way, a not good way to do this, which is where everyone goes around the circle and, hi, my name is, so and so, and my pronouns are this, and my gender is this, and my sexuality is this, and I'm an addict. Which no one, I won't say no one does in real life, because there are situations where that happens, but that's not an authentic way of presenting it, So what are some ways that we can effectively and mindfully and authentically include these characters and show that, you know, without it being this is a trans story about the trans experience, you know, like how, if we're working with, you know, world building and cultures where there is no, you know, there is no binary, or it is a normative thing, or, you know, characters that use multiple pronoun sets, things like that. What are some good ways that we can include these things in our writing and our stories without making it into more than it needs to be, if that makes sense?
So my book is also partly set in a queer normative society, and what I really wanted to do is show a multiple people of the same identity or of a similar identity, all doing it differently, all expressing themselves differently in like their clothes, their fashions, their opinions, their characters are very different, and also in their different ages. Like you have like quite old people, quite young people, and the society that I well built. You start off as non-binary as a baby, and then you decide which way you want to go. And if you want to, choose, you basically choose your gender at some point, or not if you don't want to. And that was again, as Chess said, it was like wish fulfillment, like trying to create something where how it made would be possible to. It's also because it's fantasy and it's all more historical, and that was really fun to see how we could integrate it without it being a big thing. It's just normal. Anything else is treated as okay. No, that's how we do it, and you're wrong. And yeah, that was really fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm super looking forward to reading that
Oh,
because
thank you.
I think that sounds fantastic. I write contemporary, so I don't think I don't have as much of like the freedom to make up things, and I do try to find a balance. So my book, The Clothes Make the Man, was definitely about a trans journey, but I'm writing a novel kind of based on that flash fiction collection where the character who went through this whole transmasculine journey is now kind of recognizing that if he had done this when he was much younger, he probably would have been non-binary. So even though a lot of that is based on my own personal experience, I'm trying to be very careful too, in that I'm not negating a transmasculine experience by allowing the investigation into other options. And so for me, that involves that even though like it's a novel that's sort of based on my own life, having sensitivity readers, which sounds strange for something that is personal, but also that I want to make sure to honor other people's journeys. But then for my other book, A Murder Most Queer, which is the queer Hamlet retelling, we're just people just exist. We don't like nobody says like I'm trans and people react to it. They just exist as people using they them pronouns, or like Ophelia at one point says something about when she was living as a man she was a better man than Horatio ever was, or something like that, and it's said in jest, so that we let people know that Ophelia is trans, but she's also like the power character in the whole thing, and she doesn't die, by the way, spoilers, like she does in the real Hamlet. So yeah, so I think it's just about finding the way to kind of honor your own journey while also valuing other people, if that makes sense.
Valuing other people is wild. We can't do that.
know,
That's
right?
a step too far.
Stop it with that.
Now you're getting into the real like high fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a science fiction novel that my friend Mary Robinette Quall wrote. And like Mary Robinette Quall is a cis heterosexual woman. And she said this to me a few times as we've talked about this. But she did this very simple thing that I deeply appreciated. And that was anytime like either the narrator or a character was making an introduction, they would give their name and their pronoun immediately afterwards. And this was normalized. Like everyone did this. It didn't matter. And I was like, can we do this? Can I go up to people and be like, hello, my name is Chelsea Polk, they, them. And they would be like, oh, hi, my name is Jane Doe, she, her. And I was like, we can do this.
I also come from kind of a contemporary background like Finian does. And one book that I feel like has really done the experience very well with using kind of multiple pronouns and kind of more of a journey experience, I felt was Spoken For by Ailey Wells. Um, in that story, one of the main characters moves to a new town, and when they first move, they exclusively are using he, him pronouns, and really are kind of in this space where they're trying to figure out what their identity really is. And as they start to kind of grow more comfortable in this town, which is a very queer space, a lot of this town is very queer friendly. There are a lot more queer people in this town. They start to grow more comfortable going, oh, I could use they, them pronouns if I wanted to. I'm new here and no one knows me as he, him. If I wanted to, I could use they, them. And as they start to open up more to other people, they start trying to introduce themselves with other pronouns. They start once in a while doing this. And you see them just kind of going, this is something I could do if I wanted to. And sometimes in the book, he introduces himself with he, him, sometimes with they, them. And you see this moment where he goes back to the town he was living in before, and he kind of almost has this point where he's like, oh, I am used to being he, him here in this space. I need to fit this mold. And then going back to the town that he's moved to and going, it's a weight off my shoulders not to have to be that anymore. And so I think it's really handled well in that idea that being in a different space can kind of give you that chance to allow yourself that breathing room. And as someone who did not really get to experience using different pronouns until I moved, I found that very, very relatable. So I think Spoken For is very much a good representation of how that can be done very well.
Where is this town? Can I move there?
I know. I wish it existed.
Also, thank you for making my to be read list even longer because, and Chelsea, what was the name of the book that you were just talking about with Mary Robinette Kowal?
Mary Robinette Kowal wrote The Spare Man. It's murder mystery set in space. She called it The Thin Man in Space. And I'm just going to warn you, Tesla Crane is a person who gets what she wants when she wants it, and she's trying very hard not to be that person in this book.
Awesome. Thank you.
We'll definitely make sure we get a list of all of these together and drop them in the chat for everyone joining us at the conference. So we'll have those handy. Do we have any other good titles to drop?
This is old, but I actually, oh, I don't have it on my desk. I thought I did. Marge Piercy, I think it's from like the mid 70s. There's this book called Woman on the Edge of Time. I don't know if any of you remember that, but in that one, yeah, it's a great book, isn't it? In that one, it's a contemporary woman who has been placed into an insane asylum, and she starts having what she thinks are dreams, but really she's able to go forward in time. And in the forward time, there is not gender. Everyone uses a pronoun of per, which they got, evolved from person. And the like child rearing is done in different ways, thanks to science, yay science. And so from that being from the 70s, that was a pretty amazing view of people kind of evolving beyond gender. So that was Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy. I'd highly recommend it.
I mean, we can definitely talk about like the contemporary and coming out options too, like the now time of any genre and to be released, there we go, options across genres as well, before we get into the question of what y'all have coming out next.
I was just going to say, to reach back, one of the things, and like this one got me like right in my 15-year-old heart. I read this book Golden Witch Breed by Mary Gentle. And it was one of those books, it was science fiction. And it was like, you know, ordinary Earth person comes to this planet where they do things differently around here. But what really got me was that the children had no gender. They had no gender, none of them. And so what was happening was is that children were learning skills that they were suited for. And then later, when they became adults, they decided, and it was just kind of like this thing. And I strongly suspect that a lot of science fiction writers that I know today read this book, and that basically got in their head and stayed there ever since. And I just wanted to point it out as an early example.
That's one that I think I'm going to have to add to my list. Also only grows. Plus, working as an editor with a lot of indie and self-pub people, I get a lot of really cool marginalized gender books. And it only ever grows, which is an exciting direction. There's definitely a lot coming out in the self-pub and indie space where you have a lot of queer normalized and trans normalized stories. But a lot coming out even in traditionally published like YA and kids lit, which is really exciting to see. Because I know, like, when I was a kid, you didn't have Aiden Thomas. You didn't have, you know, you didn't have these stories that were meant for, you know, 11 to 18-year-olds that were talking about this at all. Like, it wasn't an option. It was very much that old school, if you're doing gender wrong, you're a villain or you're gonna die. So I think that's been really cool.
Yeah. One that I loved was A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland, because it's a queer love story, but you have non-binary people in our society that use neo pronouns, and they're not introduced like with a big to do. They're just in there, and you also have multiple of them. So that what I appreciated, and yeah, it was just normal for non-binary people to be around, and it's a great book as well. From that.
I can't express like how helpful it is as the parent of a queer teen in a state that is increasingly passing a lot of anti-trans and anti-queer legislation. How incredible it is to have books like the Passing Playbook and Surrender Your Sons and things like that to open up those discussions with my kiddo and be able to read those like as buddy reads and things like that, and talk about the ways in which those impact our lives, the ways that those impact my child's life, and use those as a way to give specific language around gender, around sexuality, around self-experience in a state that is increasingly controlling the things that we can talk about in so many ways, the things that we can access in so many ways. So I'm very thankful for the authors who are putting out YA books, who are putting out middle grade books that have that representation in there.
Thinking of that book too, Bianca Torre is Afraid of Everything. I know I mentioned it in the last panel I was in, but it's about a non-binary bird watching teen who stumbles into a murder mystery and also has extreme anxiety. I was like, where was this when I was this anxious, weird kid, you know? But that's Justina Pasella Winans, I think. It's a fantastic contemporary and mainstream published, so not even indie. Like, we're definitely seeing way more representation out there.
For like specifically YA, this is stuff for me because I don't usually read a lot of YA, but can I shout out to Charlie Jane Anders, who has a trilogy. I believe the very first book is called Victories Greater Than Death. And it's got, like, you know, Charlie Jane's amazing writing, and it's also got Charlie Jane's amazing optimism. I think that's a good one. And I was also thinking about how like fiction is such a good way to kind of like introduce these kinds of concepts. to younger people, because novels, I always call them empathy engines. Like when you're reading them, part of what's going on is you're having an emotional experience as you identify with various characters in the book. So you get a chance to feel what they feel and maybe imagine like what it's like to be them. So I really like, I love the idea of like lots of middle grade and lots of YA books that explore these things, that present these people as heroes whose empathetic experience is the most important one in the story.
I love the empathy engine. Especially as we talk about, you know, like those background and side characters, and that kind of increasing saturation of background and side characters of, okay, now, you know, now your main character, even if he is a cishet white dude, which cool, great, that's fine. But has more and more people in his social structure who he relies on and cares about who are like this. And sometimes that's yeah, a very powerful and very subtle way to gradually kind of help change minds and open eyes and doors. All right, so with our last few minutes, the fun important one, I told you we were going to talk about what everyone here is writing. And I know one of those things is Queer Hamlet, which I'm very excited about because I had it fully memorized in high school. But you know, where do we find you? What are you working on next? Where can we, you know, read more of these stories from everyone who's been with us today?
FinnBurnett.com is my website. Pretty much anything you need to know about me is on there. And we've actually finished Queer Hamlet. It is at our agent, and we're working on Queer Twelfth Night. So like the queerest Shakespeare made gayer is what is basically our tagline for that. And so that is what I'm working on with Andrew. My book, The Price of Cookies, is released May 21st, which is a novella in Flash. And I'm also working on that novel that I got the Canada Council for the Arts grant for. I get to go to England this summer to research it, thanks to Canada's awesome supporting of the arts, which we do have some struggles, as Chelsea, I know you know, especially living in Alberta, but Canada does support their artists and writers pretty well. So that's what I'm working on, and hopefully it'll be a really great exploration of gender identity.
Jerry, want to go next?
Sure. I am J.R. Hart author, pretty much everywhere online, jrhartauthor.com. And this summer, hopefully late summer, I have a book called Washed Up coming out. It's a romantic suspense novel about a lonely crab fisherman who is autistic and living alone and ends up coming across an unexpected surprise on the beach that he's not quite ready for and has to kind of open his home and heart to.
Would you say it was a fish out of water story?
Yes, very much.
Okay, so the book on the cover, even though I knew the end, it was originally released in hardcover. There's a trade paperback release coming out on June 26th. I'm really surprised. I wasn't expecting that there was going to be a trade paperback release, but there is. I'm very happy about that. Currently, I have a book sitting on an editor's desk. I'm kind of trying to call it an epic fantasy, but it starts out with like three people who are on deadline to complete their requirements to get their graduate degree in their theoretical magical fields, and none of them are ready to graduate and become like actual real adults. They're not ready to leave the campus life yet. But there's a little bit more to that because it's also an anti-colonialist novel, and it has some things going on with like cultural assimilation. I have a big thing about cultural assimilation. And so I have these three characters who are trying to do that. I don't know what's going to happen to this book. It just hit the editor's desk. I have no publishing schedule or anything. And I'm currently writing a book about vampires because I played too much Baldur's Gate 3.
No such thing. But I do love your thing on cultural assimilation. Please keep doing it. It's a good thing. All right, Carly.
Yes, so I've just published the first volume of my queer fantasy series, Slow Moon, and the next one will be out in July, and then so on until it has 6 parts. So in November next year, the last part will be published, and I'm writing on writing a spin-off series at the moment, and yeah, lots more queer fantasy to come. I'm Carly Writes Stuff at everywhere on social media. And my website is cmkuhtz.com.
And I am XM Moon. I am very behind on my writing schedule because I'm currently in the process of moving and changing jobs. It'll do that, but it'll be about a year ago, as of the time of the conference, put out a contemporary, by accident, very self-indulgent, angry trans, tiny little baby novel. And I've got several more that are in the sci-fi fantasy realm, in various stages of drafting that will hopefully by the end of this year, at least one of them will see the light of day. So I'm MoonXM on Blue Sky. I'm not really on Twitter anymore. And then my website, which I'll drop in the chat with everyone else's links as well. So thank you for all of you joining us with the WriteHive conference. Please feel free to continue asking questions in the chat. We'll get those penned and answered. And then thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists for joining us today.